Well, hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 5 of Stand Up for Grain Safety Week. Um, this has been just an awesome week, just packed with so much information from the start of our hybrid opening event over at Iowa State, the Kent Feed Mill. We learned about um, traffic patterns. We talked about some maintenance. We talked about things for everybody, our health and well-being, our hearing. We talked about working in the heat. And sessions this week we have done in both English and Spanish, talking about fatigue. I mean, who doesn't have a little fatigue in their life? And being able to understand how that is affecting us, affecting our life, affecting our work and our safety. We had both English and Spanish in safety planning for emergencies. Very important. And then we had sessions on housekeeping. We had a great session on safety around the rail. And we are going to end this great week with talking about alternate storage options. You know, not everything is upright. So what are we doing to keep ourselves safe around those type of structures? So I'm Barb Grove, and I have been your moderator this week, and I work for Central Valley Ag. I'm a member of Jeeps. I'm a member of NGFA. And mentioning those, this great week and the program that we put on is from the OSHA Alliance, a partnership with our national OSHA, with National Grain and Feed Association, with Grain Elevator and Processing Society, and our wonderful partner, Grain Handling Safety Council, was put together the sessions for you this week. If you have any technical issues while you're doing this, you think your sound's off, or you might not be seeing something right, go ahead and email grainsafety2010@gmail.com. And I think that's going to be popped down in the chat. Um, and then again, um, just thank you everybody for attending and being a part of this great week. You know, as our week is dedicated to safety, we want to make sure to remind everyone that our rights and responsibilities, our employers are required to provide a safe and healthy workplace, free of known hazards, and even if you're not subject to OSHA enforcement. And as an employee, you have the right to a safe and healthy workplace, free of hazards, and to be able to report concerns without fear of retaliation. In general, we just want to all go home the same way we came that day. So these learning sessions, as you saw on some of our startup screens while you were checking in, they wouldn't be possible without the generous support of our sponsors, so that we are able to offer these sessions free to anyone. And our generous support came this year from Bartlett Grain Company, Central States Center for Agriculture Safety and Health, or CS-CASH, Central Valley Ag, the Grain Elevator and Processing Society, Jeeps, Grain and Feed Association of Illinois, the Grain Journal, Iowa State University, Kansas State University, Lamar Advertising Company, National Grain and Feed Association, NGFA, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, University of Nebraska Medical Center, and the Union Pacific Railroad. So let's get that chat active today and put out a thank you or clapping emoji for all those great sponsors. Because again, they have helped us to offer free learning sessions to everybody. And even if you go out to our Stand Up for Grain Safety website, there are a lot of great resources on this week's topics and under the Stand Up for Grain Safety Week and that particular day, or you can click over on resources, and we have resources from all of our past years, from our partners and other ag industry professionals around the industry. Today's session is sponsored specifically or for you by the National Grain, the Illinois Grain and Feed Association. So later, as we get towards the end, there'll be a link for a certificate posted in the chat box. You can get one from OSHA, signed specifically, and the speaker signed just for today, and that will be put in the chat box. You can download, and you can go out to standupforgrainsafety.org website, and you can get a Stand Up for Grain Safety Week participation certificate. This session is being recorded, so you can go out here in the next few days and go out to the Stand Up for Grain Safety website or out to our Stand Up for Grain Safety YouTube channel, and you can utilize these videos all throughout the year if you felt they were a great training information. If you had people that were not able to join, because sometimes, work production still has to happen. Those trucks are coming, those ships need to be loaded, so you can show this to them later. At the end of today's session, when you exit the Zoom, a short survey is going to pop up. And we do that because we want to get some feedback from you. Share your thoughts on the sessions this week and give us suggestions and ideas for topics and speakers for the coming year. Because we really want to focus on those topics that people feel they need to know more about. Also, we want to make sure everybody stays active. You've started by putting those clappings out there. Thank you very much. So let's put out in the chat box where you guys are coming from today. We love to see all across the nation and in other countries where people are coming from and joining us. Excellent. Seeing a lot of places out there. We've got North Dakota, Missouri, Kansas, North Carolina, Kentucky. We've had from the Philippines. So wonderful that we can offer this and join. And if you speak another language, you can go down into more at the bottom of Zoom, and you can go into captioning and change it to a language that may be more comfortable for you. So it's great that these Zoom sessions can offer some options for everybody to get the information and feel comfortable with it. All right, thank you, everybody. Keep those coming. We also want to know how many people may be watching with you. We know sometimes people put it up in a conference room and you're watching together. We just want to get a feel for how many people are out there. We've got 126 people signed in on Zoom links. So yeah, go ahead and fill out that poll for us. We'd love to see, again, at least 80% participation. As soon as you finish that, the poll will go away off of your screen. So while you guys are finishing up that poll and letting us know how many people are out there with you, oh, hey, we see, yeah, somebody from Argentina. Sorry, I got distracted by there. How you doing? Thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our session and our speaker today. As I said, our session today is about alternative grain storage. And our speaker today is John Lee. And he is the Director of Safety and Health and Environmental Services program for the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois. And he's been doing that since 1997. John works with state and federal OSHA. He works with EPA, DOT, all of those offices for the benefit of the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois. He conducts employee safety training, assists members in maintaining safety programs, conducts safety audits, and does visual emission tests and assists members with OSHA compliance and investigation. And he's also been a great asset to the Stand Up for Grade and Safety team and me in general with helping to give us those resources that we need to be able to train in our own companies. So I want to welcome John. You could go ahead and turn on your screen.
There I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Barb, you're a great moderator. You're a natural born podcaster.
I've been knowing I might chat just a little bit. So,
Okay, can you see my screen?
yes, go ahead and put it in play mode. There you go. And I'm giving it all back to you.
Okay, thanks, Barb.
Hmm.
I'm gonna move some things out of the way here. My
John, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? I don't know what happened there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear
Oh,
you.
sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I didn't touch anything. Sorry about that. But anyway, I don't know what you heard me say, but thank you for coming today. We're going to talk about alternate grain storage. And I don't know if you heard me say this, but it's the bane of all operations people everywhere. No one, operations people do not like it. Merchandisers like it. In a good big year, they can bring all the grain in and put it somewhere, and then you guys have to deal with it. But we're going to talk about flat storage and ground piles. We had to make a fancy title because it's not flat storage and ground pile safety is not very catchy title. There's me. Barbara introduced me. So types of alternate storage. You know, there's many different types. I mean, at least Midwest. I'm familiar with Midwest, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana. There's the traditional flat storage which would be the center picture there. Your machine shed type buildings, and that middle picture there is what that is, and then the inside of that is the bottom picture. The commodities that I see in flat storage are corn mostly, sometimes beans, but usually corn. You also see some DDGs, that type thing. And I'm probably not telling you guys anything you don't know. Piles, these are really the bane of operations people. Some of them are just emergency piles, like the one on the bottom left. And those are just put it on the ground and get it up as fast as you can, trying to accommodate the farmers at a big harvest. And then others are have fixed fill conveyors and unload conveyors, walls, where others are filled with portable equipment, like that upper left picture. That the one on the right, the one with tarped is fixed conveyors. The one on the left is portable conveyor. So flat storage is build up. Gotta move this out of the way. Build flat storage building it's a building or a large bin with powered equipment door that doesn't empty completely by gravity. So believe it or not, this is where people get confused. A round grain bin can be a flat storage structure. And we'll explain that here in just 1 minute. But so it's got to be access has to be ground level, and generally there needs to be a door big enough for equipment to go into, either a tractor auger or a articulating loader, something like you see in the picture there. So flat storage and piles is different work, and it has different hazards. But it also has the same hazards depending on what you're doing. Same hazards as a grain bin, depending on what you're doing. But usually the employees are on equipment, and like in the picture there. And by the way, there's some people in the audience. This is their employee, and they're flat. Don't be names withheld to protect the innocent. You might recognize that fella. But so the employee, he's sitting on the tractor auger there, but you got heavy equipment. A lot of it's old like that. That's late sixties tractor, maybe early seventies tractor. Due to the heavy equipment, you're gonna have potentially have carbon monoxide from exhaust buildup, something to deal with. You've got the portable and fixed conveyors. The what I'm getting at is the in floor augers. I'll show you an example of that here in just a minute. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The employees are at close proximity to these vehicles. They probably maybe shouldn't be, but maybe they get in there, so that's a definite hazard, which leads to struck by hazards, which is one of the top 6 hazards that the grain industry deals with in all areas. And then probably the biggest one is anybody who's sat on a tractor auger loading trucks all day. There's a lot of dust in there, so of course respiratory is a definite hazard, and proper PPE has to be worn. Of all the things I show you today, if you have the most dangerous thing is right in these 2 pictures here in flat storage, the open auger in a flat storage building like the picture on the left has caused horrendous accidents to people. Gentleman lost a leg almost to the hip in this one in the picture you see here to the left. In my career, I've seen 3 people step in these in floor conveyors like that were unprotected. There was a case in Oklahoma, I believe, it was about 12, 13 years ago, where 2 teenagers went into a flat storage building with 4 good legs, and they came out with 1 good leg between them. They were entrapped in a conveyor like that. They survived, fortunately, but they're maimed for life. And of course, sometimes they have boards over them, and then you have to lift the board up, and those boards have been known to rot, and people step on them and they fall through. That's 2 of the cases I dealt with things like that. So if employees cannot be exposed to augers like that, that has to be guarded. And if you have boards like that, I think there needs to be a grate underneath that board. Very, very dangerous thing right there. The most dangerous entanglement hazard in the grain industry is right there, in my opinion. So how does OSHA look at flat storage? I mean, what do they think of it? Well, the grain standard came out in 1988. Excuse me. Recently getting over a flu, so I hope I don't cough too much for you. But so the grain standard came out in 1988, and that included the grain storage structure entry rules. Well, in the early 90s, there was a case, I believe it was in Florida, where a young man was actually 3 young men were in a flat storage building, and they were walking, grain was hung up out of condition, and they were walking the grain down to a tractor auger, towards the tractor auger to get its flow. And he was engulfed, and it made national news. And so OSHA reopened the grain standard in the 90s. And in 1996, they added 1910-272H. Bin entry is 1910-272G. And how OSHA defines a flat storage is flat storage structure is a grain storage building or structure that will not empty completely by gravity, has an unrestricted ground level opening for entry, and must be entered to reclaim the residual grain using powered equipment or manual means. So, here's another example of a flat. The hoop buildings, that's the most common one I see anymore. That's definitely a flat. That's an unrestricted ground level opening. But what about this round grain bin, this traditional corrugated grain bin? Is that an unrestricted ground level opening? It is. There's a skid steer. You can barely see the end of it. So that round grain bin is a flat storage structure by definition. And as we go through here, I'll tell you what matters on that. So to be unrestricted, what does it have to be? Well, it has to be, you have to be able to step, walk, and drive unrestricted into the structure at ground level. And it says there the opening does not have to be a door. That would be for a flat storage structure. So I interpret the flat storage structure to encompass piles also, but there can't be it can't be unrestricted. So some people if you look at the picture on the right, number one, it's not ground level, it is a very nice door, much better than the 24-inch round holes. But it's not unrestricted because you have to duck to get into it. And I don't know in the picture on the left, it is ground level, but I think it's only about 5 feet high. So that is still a restricted entry. So in my opinion, you should not count those type of doors as unrestricted ground level openings. So those bins are under 1910-272G. It needs to be a door like the picture on the right there to be unrestricted in a round grain bin. And that's some would argue with me on that, but that's how my take on it anyway. So flash storage entry allows vehicle access essentially, and grain bin entry is a small hatch. Of course, we all know that. You can't see it on that picture on the rusted bin on the left, but there's a skid steer door or a large door on that, and then the one on the right is just a standard 24-inch hole. So this is a checklist, and I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I'll read some of it to you. But this is actually, I believe, it's on the Grain Handling Safety Council website, and it is a very good permit checklist to allow employees to go into a grain bin. And so this checklist, I'll read a little bit to you here. This checklist is used for when an entry into the space is through ground level drive-in doors, like we just mentioned. The employee does not get on, there's no engulfment hazard. They don't get ingrained deeper, more than waist deep, which poses a hazard to employee is waist deep. The employee is expected to be on the concrete floor or in a skid steer loader or wheel loader. No mechanical hazards that the employees can't be any mechanically hazards like the conveyor down the middle of the floor. And the employer deems this space to be free of engulfment hazards when checklist conditions are met. And like the first one is very important. That they're saying, this company says, manage continuous airflow with aeration fans by running at least 2 aeration fans to keep the carbon monoxide down. Guard the floor openings. Angle of repose has to be correct. So but I just want to mention that it's, I believe it's ghsc.com. We can put that in the chat, somebody that's listening. So let me go back a few slides here. So let's say you go in that route, the picture on the right, and you go in the door there, and you always are standing on concrete or ankle deep grain. The H rules apply, 272H rules apply. It's a flat storage. However, if you would go in that big door, or an employee would, and you crawl up on grain that poses an engulfment hazard more than waist deep, technically you're back into the G rules, which would require the standard grain storage structure entry stipulations. So you have to have, you do a permit, bin entry permit, confined space permit, or whatever your company does. You have to lock all the conveying equipment out. If it's portable equipment, you just shut it off. You have to check your atmosphere. You have to wear a lifeline and a harness if you're entering from the top and that poses an engulfment hazard. However, there's some caveats to that, which I don't know if we have time to get into that, but as long as you haven't pulled out of the bin and there's no bridging, no suspected air pockets or anything, then you don't have to wear the lifeline. You can't be any bridging, cliffing, walking down is prohibited. Or I think the standard talks about you can't enter grain that in a bridge condition. You can't walk grain down to make it flow, and you have to have an observer. So essentially, a flat storage building is a rectangular grain bin if you go in from the top and or you go in the big door and you're on top of the grain, like in this picture here. But if you go in the big door, then it's not a bin at that point. I hope I made that clear. That's long-winded there, but so if you don't know, I'm sure most of you know what angle of repose should look like. Corn is generally 21 to 23 degrees angle of repose. I live in Illinois, and the Illinois Department of Ag, when they measure bins for capacity, they use 21.5 degrees as for their formula. So I'm using on my chart here 23 degrees, and it just shows the different depths you can have If a bin's 18 foot, it's 4 foot on the sidewall. A 60-foot bin is 13, 22 feet is, or a 105 bin is 22 feet. So the only hazard, the reason I'm showing this is the angle you want. This grain, it will move a little bit, but you could walk up and down this pile all day long, and your only hazard would be a heart attack, because it's very hard to do that. And of course, it's never recommended to have employees on grain, but this grain is not going to move suddenly. It's not too steep. It's not going to avalanche on you. And I have a video here, and this is in a hoop building, and I'm assuming this guy's going up to probe it. I hear there's no sound to it, but as many of you know, it's hard to walk in corn. He is wearing a harness. He's not tied off because they have not pulled out of that bin. So that company has deemed there's no engulfment hazard, so he doesn't need to have a lifeline in that at that point there. They're using the alternative means. So, and then walking down grain. This is what the gentleman or the young men did in Florida, and it was common practice. It probably still is on farms. It's right in it's in 272G and it's in 272H. H2II, Roman numeral II. You can't no walking grain down. So what someone would do here is they go in the high side, go in the side door, or actually it'd be here, and then they just walk around trying to get more grain to flow. People who've done that have told me that you can get another 1,000, maybe 2,000 bushel to flow down that you don't have to use a sweep auger for. But that is strictly prohibited for any bin entry at all. You cannot walk grain down to make it flow. So do accidents happen in flats? They certainly do. I Googled, because Google knows everything, flat storage, grain entrapments, and there were 2 OSHA cases from the OSHA website. I believe they were both, one was in the 90s and one in the early 2000s, and there was another one in like 2015. But I dealt with one in 2010 or so. I think that was this one. And 2 employees, so they're unloading this flat, and it's a small one, and it had an unload conveyor down the middle, and it plugged up on them with a chunk of out of condition grain. So the employees go and get on top of the grain, left all the equipment running, the unload equipment running. One employee was using a piece of PVC pipe to unplug the auger, like the gentleman in this picture is doing on the right. That is the #1 way grain entrapments happen, is trying to rod a sump hole out or whatever your conveyor out. Don't let your employees do that. That is farm and commercial. That is the #1 way people get caught. Of course, the picture on the left would be a hoop building that's been pulled out of. So in that case, you employees should not be allowed to walk up on that pile because they have pulled out of that bin. So the employee, once he cleared the plug with the PVC pipe, he went down all the way to his neck, and it would have been all the way under, but the other employee was able to get out and shut everything off before he was engulfed, and he was successfully rescued after 3.5 hours. But that is a textbook case in a round grain bin or in a flat. What happens when you take a rod into a bin with the equipment running? You got to follow the OSHA rules and common bin, or the bin, your company policy on bin entry. Okay, there's another closer shot of it. Didn't see that. I just got this PowerPoint today. I missed that part of it, but that's very common, and don't do it. Don't allow employees to do it. So then the other area that I've seen, I've never dealt with it myself, but I remember reading about this, and I believe it was in Iowa. Grainbacks can engulf people, and it seems what I've seen is the way it happens mostly in flat storage. So the gentleman on the right there, he is standing on, it looks like an aeration tube, but he's not very deep. It's less than knee-deep grain in there, and that's how a vac should be used. Well, on the picture on the left, a gentleman went into the corn flat that was in good quality, and they don't know why he went in there, but they were taking the bulkhead, the grain quit running from the bulkhead of the flat, and the worker went on top of the grain with a vacuum hose, or a grain vac hose, to keep emptying it. And it's, nobody knows for sure because he was by himself, but it's speculated that the vac hose went down around his feet and essentially sucked him in. And I'm guessing he probably tried to pull it out. And the more you faster you, if you try to pull it out, the more grain's going to come out. And he was engulfed and died. So that's a strange. Most grain entrapments happen because of bad quality. That's an example of where it can happen with good quality. And it seems like it's always greenbacks when it does happen like that. So the point is, anytime employees are around grain, engulfments can happen if rules aren't followed. So just to wrap up the flat storage, and there is a lot of crossover between flats and piles. But there's engulfments, you have the cliffing, the bridging, definitely there. There's potentially atmospheric hazards with the CO running from engines, the lack of ventilation, could be grain spoilage if the bin has been fumigated. That's another issue. You need to follow the label on the fumigant. Struck by hazards, vehicles, powered equipment is always an issue if people get in a hurry. Lack of machine guarding. And then the other one I didn't mention is visibility. There's a company that they sold to another company, but they built their own belt loader out of an old uni harvester, and they could they had a whole bunch of flats, and they could load a flat in like 6 minutes. And the semis would drive in there, and they had to use a light system because the dust was so bad they couldn't see. So that is another issue, is visibility, which I have not mentioned yet. Explosion. I took this slide from someone else. I don't know. I've never heard of an explosion. I don't think there's an ignition source hot enough, and there's not a lot of confinement in a flat. So it doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but I've never seen it happen in a flat. So ground piles, they're temporary grain storage, of course. They may or may not be enclosed, like the picture on the left there. It has fixed shore walls. That one actually has fixed everything. So it may or may not, it may just be a pile, of course. And it may have fixed loading or unloading conveyors. And I'm sure there's someone in the audience that has something like this. The common ones are the Lamar system or the Union Iron, and it has a tower. Actually, the one on the right is but it has a fixed conveyor filling, goes into that tower, and then the grain just comes out the tower and then fills up the pile as it goes. And these are nice because the tarp can be on the ring, you see right here, and then as the grain goes up, the tarp goes with it, so there's no tarping afterward, which is good. There had been, there's a segue here a little bit. The EPA in Illinois, and they tried to make it national, federal EPA did. Well, I mean, if like in the picture on the left there, it has a fixed unload there. Actually, that one doesn't, but let's say it did. That's essentially a grain bin without walls and a roof. So EPA was saying that counted against your permanent storage, but luckily that issue has been tabled for now. But here's an example of a fixed unload conveyor that is underneath. So under that skid steer on the right is pushing grain to a large sump hole with a grate on it, and it's going into that conveyor, and that's how they're going to a leg, and that's how they're unloading this big pile. So it really is a grain bin without walls and a roof. So the portable equipment used. Hopefully you guys are using better ones than the upper left picture. There's some tractor augers. There's some old ones out there, and some places don't use them all the time, so they do have some old equipment. So it has to all be guarded as properly as it could be, and of course employees need to never get off the vehicle when it's running. Many times a loader is used, a big articulating loader, to pick things up, which again would cause struck by hazards. So is there engulfment hazard on a ground pile? And there definitely is. Anytime grain is somewhere and someone gets on it, there is, but not very often. So, and especially in the conditions I'm mentioning here in this slide, if the filling was continual, not different seasons, so there's no layers. It has a lot of different moistures. You haven't pulled out of the bottom if it has a permanent fixed unload conveyor, except maybe to core it, which that's one of the problems with piles is most of them you can't core, which causes condition problems. If the angle of repose is good, like the picture, well, you know, the slide I showed, which is also a little version of it is in this picture there also, there really is no engulfment hazard anticipated. Um, as long as it's, you know, the key thing is the angle of repose and the condition. However, many times things like this happen. You're putting every kernel of corn is a living organism and it wants to grow, and you throw it on the ground, bad things can happen. And this is a good example of those towers building fines up around them. You know, any spout line, anywhere has, wherever you're filling anything, you're gonna have fines building up. And I call this cliffing. What's the angle of repose on that? I would call that 90 degrees around the tower there. So employees definitely cannot be on this pile for sure. So this company put this out in November at harvest, at the end of November, or I'm sorry, at the end of harvest, which was in November. Kept it there until late July of the next year, and I mean, they didn't lose a lot of money on it, but the quality wasn't the greatest. And they were picking it up with big loaders, and a big chunk of that, um, a big chunk of corn fell and knocked the exhaust off of their loader. You know, and that's another thing. I'm showed the picture of the skid steer. You know, skid steers aren't very tall. That whole skid steer could be engulfed, and that's happened before. And even our big articulating loaders have been, corn has covered them mostly up. That's another hazard. Keep coming up with other ones here. So here's a little short video, no sound with it, but it's, you know, steaming, it's getting hot, you know, conditions not good, the bridging is happening. So of course, an employee would not be allowed to go on something like that ever. Well, I mean, as it sits there, I mean, you have to get up and cut the tarp off anyway, but. So just to kind of review all that, if pulling from underneath and grain is not flowing to normal angle of repose, bridging occurs and it's a hazard. If pulling from ground level and cliffing is observed to a degree, you could have a definite issue with chunks falling off. And I put CO in there because there's a lot of crossover, but you're not going to have a lot of CO issues out in the open with a ground pile. But that would be an issue in a flat storage building, of course. Which everything I just mentioned here in the last few minutes is works for either flat or ground piles. So tarping hazards. There's a fun thing. This is what I'm talking about, the bane of operations people. I'm sure there's people in the audience who have tarp piles before, and it's not fun. It's physically demanding. There are people that, you know, the American population is not getting thinner, and we're not getting healthier. And even people to go to the gym would struggle doing this kind of work. It's tough. Rescuing a person caught on a tarp is very difficult. That happens sometimes. You've got 20 people or 15 people up there, 10 people, and somebody slips and falls and you pull the tarp underneath them, and they might be 20, 30 feet underneath the tarp. And then you got to figure out how to get them out. When you're tarping, more is better. You know, have enough people to complete the tasks. There are professional groups that go around, and I've seen them tarp piles with 6 people before. It's amazing to watch. They really know what they're doing, but they bring a lot of equipment with them, a lot of pulleys and cables, and sometimes there might be a crane. You might get a crane to lift the tarp up there, and then it just falls down, rolls down. So there's another hazard. You got a lot of moving equipment. You got to have one person lead, of course, just coordinated, because tarps weigh a lot. They're can be 1,000 pounds per section. And if it's 40-mile-an-hour winds, which every time I go around a grain elevator, it seems like it's 40-mile-an-hour winds. It doesn't matter what time of year it is, except for the dead of summer. So when you're getting ready to tarp, usually in the fall, winter time, you got to pick a day when there's not a lot of wind. What I put here was 10 miles an hour or under wind speed. A little bit of wind is going to help you, but too much is very dangerous. Some people say up to 15 miles an hour to tarp. You know, walking on a wet or frost tarp is a hazard. the piles, your fall hazard could be as high as 8-10 feet with the sidewalls. So you gotta stay alert with all the equipment, maybe a crane around. And then another bane of people is the tarp blowing off. You know, the power goes out and the tarp blows off. And then you got guys up there on a Saturday or whenever cutting, picking up tarp or trying to fix tarp, resew it. And that's, you get people up there, it might be wet, definite hazard. So I mentioned it's not likely to have a engulfment in a pile, but it does happen. And I was talking to a guy a couple days ago, and I was telling him I was doing this webinar on flat storage, and he was telling me they had an employee. This picture on the right there, they're actually filling that pile. But imagine they had an employee standing like on the other side that still had a tarp on it. This side had been unloaded, and he was too close to the top when he tried to cut the tarp on that side, and there was a big grain slide. The tarps are famous for holding the angle of repose steeper than it should be on corn. And when that happened, it avalanched and he about went with it. Luckily, I think somebody grabbed his foot and kept him from going down with it. So people need to know that you really got to watch that angle of repose with those tarp. But this story I want to tell you here, I got this from another company and they wrote this. So I'll try to explain what happened, but they had someone engulfed under about 2 feet of grain in a pile. As the employee was, the employee was standing cutting the tarp, the corn began to slide and the tarp began to rip in front of him. So he was standing, this isn't where it happened. I have pictures of where it happened, but so imagine him standing like right there cutting tarp and the angle of repose was too steep. Their tarp cap was still on and the fans were on, so it was really steep. So when he cut that, the grain started moving and started ripping the tarp. So he started trying to run down the tarp to stay ahead of the grain slide. And the employee fell into moving grain, avalanching grain, and was engulfed under approximately 18 to 24 inches of corn. And you can't get up if that happens. Pretty scary. That's a horrible way to go. Here's the actual tarp it happened on. In this area here. And he cut it. So they started picking it up, but the fans were still on. The tarp cap was still well, I'll get to that in a second, but luckily there was someone on the tractor auger. I think they called it a Sudengay, and he saw it happen and he saw roughly where he was. So he was able to get him rescued and he survived. So I had never heard of anything like that before, but I could definitely see it happening. Someone not realizing what would happen when you cut that tarp with the angular post too steep. Here's the footsteps when he went up to do it. I believe that was how he was running back, I guess. So the root cause is what they came up with is the tarp cap was in place, fastened to the wall, and they didn't have probably didn't have a cordless drill to pull out these 2x4s that held it on top. And then they also had the fans running. Or that made an artificial bridge, and then they also had the fan still running, like I mentioned, and that led to that happening with the pressure and the grain moving unexpectedly. But that's a very unique thing. I've never heard of that. I'm sure it's happened other places, but so to summarize, I got two slides left here. The criteria to have flat, it's got to be a building or structure or a ground pile that is not completely emptied by gravity, has an unrestricted ground level opening if it's a building, but it's not always a door if it's not a door if it's a ground pile. And employees must have to get in there and reclaim the residual grain with manual means or powered means. You got to be able, the door has to be able, you have to be able to step, walk, drive unrestricted through that door, entering only through unrestricted ground level openings and no atmospheric hazards present. That's another key thing, which your ventilation, your aeration should take care of that. But if employee happens to go in from the top of a flat or in a bin that has a big door, but if it's open, but he still goes in from the top, you're back into the grain storage structure rules, which is permits, locking out, atmospheric check, lifelines, everything. I repeated that, I guess. Everything locked out, no walking down grain, and having an observer and no being in a bin with bad great quality. So thank you. And Barb, I can turn it back over to you.
All right, if you go ahead and stop share, there you go. So as we are going to tackle a little bit of Q&A here, Salah, if you could go ahead and pop up those sponsor slides again. We just want to remind everybody who has helped to make this week possible. So those sponsor slides will be up while John and I are doing a little bit of Q&A here quick. So let me see. Nicole asked, what is a safe way? Oop, I lost it. Um, sorry, there. Um, there she is again. Okay. What is a safe way to fix the large clipping situation in the picture that you showed?
Well, that's a good one. I would go from another angle in the you don't obviously you don't unload right underneath the cliffing, and you move where the grain is better condition, you unload from there, and hopefully that cliffing will fall on its own, and under or the other moving grain will undermine it. That's my guess. That's my take. I've seen other people, they'll use they'll have a big loader and they'll put a large I-beam on it and ram it from a distance from
Yeah.
that's another way to do it. It's not a good situation. I'm a safety guy. I tell people don't do those things. So
Yeah, I have seen that in both the flat buildings, not just for grain, but for fertilizer, where you've gotten some moisture and it's cliffed up. So somebody has taken again, a big, in a sense, a prodding ram, put it on a loader and rammed at it. Unfortunately, when you think about somebody doing that, as you mentioned, putting a long pole or something to prod it, if the height of that grain is taller than the length of the pole and the equipment you're using, it can still come over on top of that big end loader and engulf somebody.
for
So
sure.
you
For
have to
sure.
think about those things. Everything we've talked about this week and we've talked about in the past, it's always about assessing the hazard. And again, if that grain is stacked higher than you, if you prod it to make it fall, it can still come down on top of you. So got to keep those things in mind.
For sure.
So there was a question, can we use compressed air to tackle any issues with the quality of the grain?
I've seen that done before, but usually it's more in an in-grain bins from underneath this tunnel under a sump hole, blowing out chunks out of the reclaims. I'm sure it would work if you had a long enough pole and you're essentially just trying to undermine it so it falls on its own. So I think that would work, but like you just said, you wouldn't want employees anywhere near it because if it's taller than them, for sure.
Yeah. Do you know, are there any rules for how long you can store grain in bunkers and piles? It seems like this is something that could go out of quality.
Yes, and I actually, when we were talking earlier today on the Zoom, Barb and I called the boss about 15 minutes before the show here because he wasn't in today. And in Illinois, I live in Illinois, so that's the only one I know. But an emergency pile that's just a pile in the ground, that's called emergency. That's 90 days. That's all you get for that. No extensions. If you have a pile with air and a tarp and air and walls, you get 6 months, and then you can ask for an extension on that. But they don't have to grant it because every Department of Ag has its own rules,
They
and
do.
some are better than others, like we were talking earlier, for sure. So, that's a lot of money laying on the ground. Nobody wants to keep it there very long. At least if I was the general manager, I wouldn't want it there.
Well, that's exactly right. When ground piles emergency piles, just thrown right there on the ground. That's usually because a harvest has become so large and you're just trying to handle it so you don't turn your producers away. But your bunkers, it's thought that, they are inexpensive storage, and they are to build. But then the maintenance of the grain, the cost of electricity for aeration, those things come after the fact. So
Very
sometimes
true.
when that financial decision is made, you're looking at the upfront cost. Um, I would like you to explain a little bit more about the unrestricted rule you talked about earlier. Because I've seen some of those grain bins and never thought of a grain bin where you can, drive a bobcat in to clean it. Never thought of it as, in a sense, a flat storage building. So can you just explain that again a little bit more on that
Okay.
unrestricted entry?
So, you have to be able to, to be unrestricted, you have to be able to walk on it without ducking. That's one stipulation.
Okay.
The other one is got to be big enough for the equipment to get in, of course. And so like I call them skid steer doors. They put in those bins, and of course you have to beef up the floor, the aeration floor. You can't just put a skid steer on any bin. It has to be designed for it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so if it's unrestricted and you can drive something in there, then that bin becomes a flat if you're entering from that door, and you don't have to follow the observer and the permit and that whole thing.
Kind of
But you still have to
confined
protect
space
employees with
entry,
that. I'm sorry. What was
and
that?
like confined space
And
entry,
confined space entry. Yeah. Some
or
some companies use.
just, yeah, entry.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, there's been some good comments out here. I liked your comment about tarping bunkers. That is so true. You get that back and that knee strain. One company that I worked for actually did physical capacity tests upon hire, and in those, part of that test, if you didn't um, pass the stuff about your abilities with your back, with your knees, you were not approved to be on a bunker.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Because I know for our company, um, like this week or the things we see in the news, it's always the grain engulfments or the explosions that everybody thinks about. But it's the strains and sprains that are probably some of the biggest or the most common injuries that
For
we
sure.
get. So
And I have a
assessing,
funny story on that. I have a good friend of mine who was a operations manager for many years, over 30 years, and they would hire temporary help to tarp. Well, and many of them, even I'm an old guy, but the young guys don't. The old guys do better walking on the ground because they know how to do it. It's partly, and nobody, like I said, nobody's in shape. But they hired a bunch of young people, and they had really baggy pants, and they're trying to pull the tarp one handed and hold their pants up with the other. So he had one of his assistants go cut a bunch of rope, and they made belts for him, so they were able to pull the tarp without having to hold their pants up. They all thought a belt was a great idea. That they sell them at Walmart.
so when we were putting, those loads of people lining that top of the tarp to pull it, we took C-clamps and put a clasp on the end so people could, and they had handles, so you could clamp it on the tarp and you could pull with the handle. Now you can purchase tarps that have a handle on them just to help with that. We had, let's see, a great comment out there. From Jeff Dieters. And he said, my motto was never move faster than the slowest employee when pulling the tarp. Have a lead guy at the top, and it doesn't have to be the supervisor that is watching that pace on both sides to pull the tarp evenly at a steady, safe pace. If the space allows, tie tarp to equipment on each side to let the equipment do the work. Like, and he said, like you said, walking the grain is hard enough without having to carry and pull items. Um, I know our company has gone to that. I mean, we have either loaders on both sides, um, tie a corner of that tarp or an edge of that tarp around a basketball and cinch that rope. And we put, in a sense, a little piece of an old aeration tube under it to keep it above the grain so it's not plowing in, and then allow that pieces of equipment to pull it.
Oh,
Everybody's finding better ways so that we aren't, and plus everybody doesn't have 15, 20 extra employees to get on top of these tarps sometimes that it takes to
right,
get
right.
these pulled on some of these big tarps.
Okay.
I want to go back to, you were talking about fumigation on flat buildings. That's another safety thing for people to consider. Some of these flat buildings do have a dump pit and leg. And I've seen some that have multiple flats with one dump pit and leg, and they may have been fumigating one of the flats. And you think about that, how hard a flat building must be to seal. So again,
Yes.
thinking about your employees that are out there, that is there fumigation leaking that could cause a safety hazard? Again, something to think about
For
uh,
sure.
in those situations. If you have a flat building, and you're working with another, whether loading or unloading it, make sure you're considering all those options. Again, a comment you made about, probing or poking at those sumps. And you said, hey, just don't do it. That's something for anybody watching. If you're an employee, and whether you're in a bunker, a flat, whether you're in a bin, protect yourself. Stand up for your own rights. If somebody says, I'm telling you to go and do that, just need to stand your ground. I know we get worried about our job, but if you're dead, you don't have a job anyway. You step in that sump or you get entangled. You showed in the one flat building, again, that long unguarded conveyor, unload conveyor. Um, Sometimes we have to stand up for ourselves, not sometimes, all the times.
All the
Stand
time.
up for our own safety and say, you know what, let's step back. We need to look at this. Is there a better way? Or you know what? Lock out, tag out. That equipment needs to be shut off if I'm going to be going in there. And we all have to be able to do that. Yes, we fumigate every month in their department, like silos, pits, elevators, and on the premises. So yeah, we all just have to pay attention to what else is happening, to who else it could affect. Because some of these structures aren't real airtight. Let's take a look. All right. I don't see any more questions right now. I know there was a couple on how do you handle that cliffing grain. So I think, that is a very concerning look in these. And, as John mentioned about keeping them on the ground, whether it is an emergency pile, whether it's going to be there a little while, every state's Department of Ag, or whether it's under a state license or USDA license, has a little bit different regulation on that. And, we need to make sure that we're able to handle taking care of that grain quality. If you
Right.
can't handle taking care of the grain quality, you better get that up. So, I'm going to take a look here for a few more questions, but I would like to say thank you again, everybody, for joining us this week and for joining us and being engaged here with John. And we appreciate so much all of you, and stay safe out there.
Thanks, Barb.